Okay, in this podcast, I'm going to talk about how to deal with someone who has NPD or a similar disorder. Here, I wish to explain the acronym JADE, which actually stands for Don't Justify, Don't Argue, Don't Defend, and Don't Explain. When you are dealing with someone who has NPD, it can be especially difficult if you are in a close relationship to that person. It can be especially difficult if you are dependent upon them emotionally, psychologically, emotionally, or materially and financially. Each of these can be used as a string that they can use to pull you this way or their way as they feel. So by being dependent on such a person, you are in turn giving them power to control you. There are many aspects of this relationships which we could discuss, but for starters, let me just say this. Whenever you encounter or have a bad encounter with such a person who has NPD, please do not take it personally, because it is not about you, but it's about them. Of course, no person is without a flaw, and that also includes you, but it is absolutely unacceptable to be treated less than you deserve to be treated. Which means, in turn, you have to recognize that some relationships and some approaches are just simply dysfunctional. So, first thing is not to put blame on yourself. But for now, let me just dive into the acronym which I am going to talk about, which is JADE. The first letter means don't justify. So this does not mean that you do not approach the person responsibly or respectfully, but when the other person crosses the line, such as the boundary of what is personal, what is their business, and what is your business, you do not owe to anyone to justify yourself, your decisions, such as who you associate with, what choices you make in life. And as soon as you fall into the trap of trying to justify yourself for having made the choices that you made, they may actually use this opportunity to bring you down or make you feel like crap, basically, or simply to have a meaningless argument which leads to nowhere. So basically, no, you don't need to justify yourself, but you don't need to even tell them this. You don't need to tell the person, I don't have to justify myself to you. So be careful what information you are giving to the other person, because people with NPD are often calculative, manipulative, sometimes even charming, and controlling. The methods that they utilize are fear, guilt, emotional arousal, such as throwing anger tantrums at you, blaming you, shaming you. So just know that this is not normal and you should not put up with such behavior. Let me just ask you one thing. Whenever you notice such a behavior that is coming from them at you, observe the other person, their body language. Are they looking at you? Do they even dare to look at you while they're saying all these things? Personally, I observed that in such situations, such people are not even able to establish eye contact. So eye contact is one thing which can tell you if the other person is genuinely deluded or if they just want to use you as something to put out their frustrations onto you. Okay, So the second letter of our acronym JADE is A. Don't argue. So this may be difficult sometimes because what they do intentionally, and they're very good at it, is they will approach you with extreme anger, and they will kind of provoke you to want to argue with them, because this for them represents a win, you know. Whenever you start arguing with them, they won, you know. So don't trip over everything that they throw at you, okay? So now the question is, how do you not argue with someone who has just assaulted you, basically? Well, like I said in the beginning, it's not gonna be necessarily a short process. If you cannot simply exclude them out of your life, you may want to achieve independence in the following areas: physical distance, emotional distance, and material and financial distance. Without this, they will have strings to pull you, so be very careful. The more games you play with them, you know, the more you are dependent upon them. So acknowledge your responsibility for having established interactions with them, or for not being proactively engaged in breaking those unhealthy bonds that you have with those people. So, but since this is a process which can take some time before you achieve this kind of independence, in the meantime, it is important that you approach them responsibly and even kindly, you know. I don't want to be too philosophical, but like Jesus said, love your enemies. But this does not mean that you go out in the coffee shop with your enemies, okay? So, and it is also not love to treat yourself less than you deserve to be treated. It is also not love if you allow yourself to stay in such a relationship. So again, establish that 3 distances which I said before. How do you not argue with such a person? Well, first method is, whenever you feel that they arouse you emotionally, such as whenever you feel anger, do not simply jump back at them or say something mean to them, even if it's true, you know, and even if you're right. I suggest that you do not argue with them, but do whatever you can in that moment. Even go to the bathroom break, take a few breaths, call a friend or someone, you know. And when you do this, they may not like this at all, you know, this person with NPD. But you should never feel guilty about taking a 5-minute break for yourself to clear your head and to go back to them and approach them responsibly, even respectfully, and even kindly. But remember, even though you are approaching them in such a manner, it does not mean that you are going to remain in such a relationships in hope of things changing, because things will not change. This person will never change. You have to accept this. This person has such a flawed self-image that nothing can repair it, no matter how much you try. And you know, I'm not gonna tell you to simply break such a relationship, but please be observant of the reality that is happening in front of you, and acknowledge the facts. Recognize that you are not the first person to deal with such a person who has such a disorder. There have been tens of thousands of cases studied, such as your case, by people who are experts in the area of psychology, and you know you have to believe the fact that such a person will never change, so detach, please. But why is it so difficult to detach from such a person? Sometimes it can be difficult because if we detach, then life will demand more of us. Obviously, cooperating with other people always has certain pros and cons. You would not be in such a relationship with this person if you did not gain some benefit from the relationship. But also recognize that this is not a healthy relationship and it is not long-term sustainable, and that you are selling yourself short by staying in such toxic relationships. And additionally, you are not being loving to the other person either, because you are in essence, as you are staying with such a person, being an enabler for their negative behavior, which spreads and helps them spread their negativity even more. So don't be a force for darkness, but a force for light. Okay, I hope this is not too philosophically entangled. But anyway, let me just move on to the third letter of our acronym, which is JADE. And the third letter is D. Don't defend. So whenever you are trying to defend any behavior in front of them, you are in essence seeking confirmation for your behavior from them. And this, in essence, is a kind of emotional dependence or even intellectual dependence. You have to learn to think for yourself, make your own choices, and put faith into the choices that you make, even if those choices do not necessarily have favorable consequences all the time. Because sometimes people try to make you feel guilty for making mistakes, but such people fail to recognize what Albert Einstein recognized when he said, "The person who has never made a mistake has never learned anything new." So, my view is that mistakes are not only a part of life, they are supposed to be in your life. And a mistake is never really a mistake, it's just a take, You just make an attempt. Okay? So, whenever you find yourself trying to defend your choices or defend your standpoints or your points of view, whenever you are defending your points of view or anything like that, you are basically asking for their approval. And remember, you don't need other people's approval, okay? You are an adult and you're free to make and think whatever the hell you want to do. But of course, it's a different story if you are making choices that affect both of you, which again is a kind of dependence. You have to ask for their, or maybe you're avoiding to even have a communication with them because of all the communication noise that you experience. For example, it's obviously not the same for everyone, but that's exactly the reason why having relationships that are deeply involved with such people is so difficult. So basically, yeah, the rules of the game are a little bit different when the other person actually has a say in your choices. And this does not mean that the person with NPD is necessarily always going to be difficult to deal with. But like I said, there can be some spiritual growth in knowing yourself, because the other person may reflect back to you the flaws which you may have, but you can clearly begin to recognize it when it becomes toxic, okay? When insults start to happen, when boundaries are broken, when they start to use blame and guilt on you or make you feel less than you are. Okay, so the last letter of our acronym JADE is E. Do not explain. Okay, so generally speaking, when you are in a healthy relationship, you can explain things to the other person, and you know that they will not use your information against you. You can trust the person. But in such an unhealthy relationship, such as with someone who has NPD or is a manipulative person, they will actually try to get information out of you or try to make you justify yourself, your actions, to boost their self-image. So even if someone shouts at you, you do not need to explain anything to anyone. You know, they try to make it also melodramatic, but do not fall into the trap of letting them control you through emotions. You are a responsible adult and you do not need to explain yourself to other people. Because most often these things are just provocations, and once they get you hooked, then they can make you justify yourself, they can bring you down, they can make your self-image distorted, They use very, very subtle mental traps to catch you in this jade action. So please, don't justify yourself, do not argue, do not defend, and do not explain. This may make the relationship feel more distant, but believe me, you want to make distance from fire as well, don't you? Please, it may not look like fire at first, but once you get burnt, please don't justify, don't argue, don't defend, don't explain. Peace.